Spider-Man may be a superpowered hero with great strength, agility, healing, and his infamous spider sense, or the Peter Tingle for fans of the MCU movies. However, Spider-Man's power comes not only from his physical abilities, but also from his intellect. He was the one to create his iconic suit, web fluid, and web shooters, among other gadgets. Marvel's Spider-Man does a great job of highlighting the spider powers of Peter Parker, while also showing that Peter has an intellect that is very impressive as well. The game does this in terms of gameplay by having gadgets that you can gain throughout the game to help you fight the villains you face along the way. What I want to do here is to talk about what I thought about all of the gadgets of the game. To be honest, I thought all of them were pretty fun to use at times, but there were certainly ones I liked and used a lot more than others. As always with lists like these, I'm just giving my opinions. I realize that everyone has different playstyles and enjoys certain things more than others. This is just a list that highlights my own. So on to the list. At number 8, I have Suspension Matrix. Bottom of the list, we have a gadget that is interesting but suffers from a few setbacks in my opinion. Suspension Matrix creates an anti-gravity field that lifts enemies into the air for a short period of time and turns them into glorified piñatas. Sounds pretty fun, right? It can be, but I didn't tend to use it too much. One reason was that this was one of the last 2 gadgets that I unlocked in the game. I was also unable to get it fully upgraded until I was in the DLC, so I tended to lean more on my fully upgraded gadgets and didn't play around with this gadget too much. It's still fun and has a pretty good combo with the Trip Mine gadget and can lift up some enemies that other gadgets aren't effective against, but it's still probably my least favorite gadget of the bunch. At number 7, I have Concussive Blast. This entry suffers from some of the same problems that Suspension Matrix does. This is another late gadget unlock for me and another one I was unable to fully upgrade in the main game. Concussive Blast is quite a bit of fun as it allows you to heavily knock back enemies that are in front of you. This is particularly fun on top of buildings so you can knock people off of buildings and magically web them to safety very easily. It's a very satisfying time to land on a building and blast people all over creation. It also has a fun combo with webbing, particularly a web bomb, where you can web people and blast people onto walls with the knockback from Concussive Blast. Now, this may have been a gadget I used a bit more had it unlocked earlier in the game, but since it didn't, I was more than able to get by with the other gadgets I had better upgraded. It also has some limited utility when on the ground. Sure, you can web people and blast them into walls, but it's not quite as much fun as blasting people off of rooftops. At number 6, I have Web Bomb. This gadget is pretty much exactly what you would expect. It's a bomb that explodes web all over the place. It's great for webbing up groups of enemies, but for some reason, I just never really loved it as much as some of the other web options in the game. In part because enemies don't always group up well, and it was always a bit more fun to use mines, impact web, or even electric web if I wanted to use a web attack. It's not a bad gadget, but it is one that just never really became one of my go-tos. At number 5, I've got Spider Drone. I had a hard time figuring out where to stick Spider Drones. I did use these fairly regularly through the game, but other than distracting enemies, I never felt like they really did a lot. Sometimes it was super nice just to have something out and distracting and doing some damage to enemies, but it was always a bit hard to tell how much they were actually doing, at least in terms of the damage side of things. Like I knew they were getting distracted, but I didn't know how much the guys were actually getting damaged by the drones. They're definitely not nearly as good as the drone from the Spider Bro suit power, but I liked the idea of them and found them nice to set off in order to distract some enemies so I could focus on others. With this usage, it was kind of hard to know how much damage they did because I was never focused on the guys that were getting distracted, but I still found these useful in certain situations. This may be an example of one that I like the idea of more than how much of an impact they actually had in the game, but I'm willing to admit that, and I thought the drones were cool, so there's that. At number 4, we had web shooters. Spider-Man's trusty web shooters are right in the middle of the pack here for me. This is probably the gadget I use the most over the course of the game since it's your first one and one that has its uses fill up over time automatically, unlike any of your other gadgets. The only real negative here is that when it comes to certain later types of enemies, web shooters really lose their effectiveness, which is the same of a number of other gadgets. However, web shooters are a classic and are very versatile in webbing enemies up, distracting enemies in stealth, and even necessary to attack certain enemies or even bosses. They're maybe not fun, but they get the job done. At number 3, I've got Electric Web. I'll be honest, at first I didn't love Electric Web. I thought it was more of a gimmicky web that was mainly to use to charge the electric panels that you find in the game to progress or explore certain areas. As I went on and started to use it a bit more, I grew to like Electric Web more and more. It just does a whole slew of things. It stuns enemies with electricity, which then can jump to other nearby enemies. It damages these enemies while they're electrified, and is also really useful against some of the DLC enemies that have exosuits recruits, as the electric web will stun them and allow them to be attacked. This makes electric web the superior group option, in my opinion, over web bomb, but it took a while for me to get to that opinion. At number 2, I had Impact Web. If you're going for sheer power in your webbing, this gadget is for you. Impact Web will send a large shot of webbing that will web them up in one shot and blast enemies backwards. Want to knock guys off a roof earlier in the game? Impact Web them near a ledge. Need to web people against walls for a bonus objective? Impact Web is there for you. I just always found Impact Web a lot of fun to use. Sadly, as with most gadgets, they do lose their effectiveness against certain late game enemies, but it's still a lot of fun to use on some of the smaller enemies and send them flying and getting attached to a car or mailbox or wall or whatever you happen to shoot them into. So it was definitely one of my most used gadgets in the game. And at number 1, I had Trip Mine. This was just my absolute favorite gadget of the game. Trip Mine was just always a lot of fun to use. So Trip Mine is basically a mine that can attach to surfaces or enemies and will shoot out a webbing and pull them toward a wall or even another person when the beam of the mine is broken. Want to try to get people webbed together? Mine someone and try to get them to face another guy. Want to set up booby traps for a guy on patrol? Launch a mine into his path or against the wall he walks by. I just always had a lot of fun playing around with the mines. Sadly, they don't work on every enemy, but they always felt satisfying to use against those who could be taken down by this gadget. And that's why it is the top of my list. It just was a gadget that I always enjoyed, felt like was always depleted in my inventory, and was always happy to get some new ones. And this is my ranking of the gadgets in Spider-Man. To be honest, all of them had some fun applications and could be enjoyable to use, but this shows what my favorite gadgets look like. How would your list look? Any gadgets you'd personally rate higher or lower? Let me know in the comments, as I always appreciate hearing other people's opinions on things like this. That's all for this list though, so we'll see you in the next video.